Right, so you've decided to get started investing in properties to make some extra cash in the hope of maybe one day paying for your parents' early retirement, or telling your workplace deuces, or just having a lifelong peace of mind knowing that your bills are always going to be covered. Whatever your reasons are, you then type into Google how to make money from property investments and you realize that you've hit a crossroad, guys. Should I take the left route where I'm renting a property, or should I take the right route where I'm flipping the property? Which one is the best to do? For a beginner investor, this can get very confusing very quickly, guys. And to be quite honest with you, it can also be overwhelming too if you don't establish from the get-go, from the start, guys, an efficient strategy to make money for you and your property investments. This is why I've made this video for you guys, yeah? It's to tell you what you can expect when you employ either method, but also I'm going to be talking about the pros and the cons associated with each option too. For those of you that don't know, my name's Liability Finance. I've been a property investor for about 3 years now, guys. I'm actually in the process of acquiring another property, my biggest one thus far, hands down. I'm going to be making a video on it soon, so make sure to stay tuned. But in this week's video, we're going to be talking about a crucial question that a lot of beginner property investors will ask themselves before they embark on their property journey. Should they flip a property or should they rent it out? But before we answer that, could you guys do me a big favor? Could you let YouTube know how good these videos are? And you can really do that by smashing the heck out of the like button, sharing this video, and subscribing with the notification bell on if you haven't done so already. And feel free to leave a comment too, that goes a long way as well. First off, we'll start with the definitions. You see, when you flip a property, what you're actually doing is you're buying it for a lower price, and then after some time you sell it for a higher price. So you can imagine the difference between what you sold it for is obviously a positive value, which means you're making a profit. You get to keep, well, not exactly. I'm going to actually discuss this point later on in this video, but in general, the most common type of flipping, what you're actually doing is you're buying a below market value property that's typically in a sort of state, and you're improving it. So you're adding value to some degree. Now, in terms of adding value, this can include a broad range of things. For example, doing up a kitchen, or adding a conservatory, or extending the house further so that there's more floor space. That all adds value to the property and therefore pushes the selling price upon which you can make a bigger profit from. According to estate agents today, the average flip in the UK last year made 30k profit. So you can imagine this is a very lucrative strategy to employ. Whilst renting out a property, as we all know it, is where you provide a dwelling for a single person or multiple people, and in exchange of doing that, they provide you with positive cash flow, i.e. profits each and every month. However, what a lot of landlords forget is that this isn't actually the only way that you make money from renting out a property. There are actually 3 other ways, so it's 4 in total. And I'm going to be discussing this next, so stay tuned. So now that everyone's on the same page of what flipping and renting actually is, which one is the best route to take? Well, the answer is it depends, guys. It depends on your personal scenario. A better question to ask at this stage is, how can you make money from either case? You see, when you rent out a property, yes, you're going to get positive cash flow in the form of profits each and every month, which is great. But also don't forget that you're going to be using some of that rental income to pay down your debts. So, you know, your mortgages, your loans, the things that you've used to actually finance getting that property, you're going to be reducing that. So you're benefiting financially from that too. And over time, when you consider the fact that capital, that properties grow in value, there's capital appreciation to consider there too. So when you do eventually sell, you're going to sell for a bigger profit than what you bought it for. And dependent on who you rent your property to and where you rent your property can affect how much tax you pay. So you can avoid tax there too. However, for me, finding a successful rental property comes down to the amount of preparation that you do before you acquire that property. And a huge chunk of that depends on your calculations. You know, when you run the numbers on that rental property, are they realistic numbers? Will you get a guaranteed profit each and every month? You need to do this thoroughly, guys. And I've actually done a video on this. It's called Making Money from Property. Check it down in the description box if you haven't. I suggest you really look at that video, guys, because it will help you go far with realistically, not optimistically, realistically calculating the numbers on your rental property. But on the other side of the coin, flipping a property is kind of like a quick way to extract a huge amount of money out of a property. You see, when you flip a property, you're only really making use of just one of those ways to make money, the capital growth. This is what you're fully maximizing and you're extracting a lot of money out of. You can argue for some cases that avoiding tax is a way that you can financially benefit from flipping. But for majority of property investors, it's unavoidable, guys. You're gonna pay tax. So now, knowing what you know, let's put it into context. Let's say you wanted to open up a restaurant business in the next 6 months. Out of those two methods, flipping or renting, which one's the best to employ? I know it's probably the flipping, right? Because you know you're going to get a huge amount of money in such a short time frame. Whereas if you change your goals to maybe building a legacy for your children, then you're going to want to benefit from the rental property, because you know you're going to be making money in 4 different ways. And yes, it's a slow burner, but for the short term, it doesn't matter. You're concerned with the long term when your children do eventually gain from those assets that you've built. This is what I mean when you need to really sit down and assess your scenario. Understand what you're trying to get out of it, because it will really help you. It will aid you in answering which route is the best to take out of flipping versus renting. But enough of the good stuff though, guys. Time to talk about the negatives, the nitty-gritty associated with each method. Now, being a landlord myself, renting out a property, I can tell you guys for free, a lot of the negatives comes from maintaining and managing the property. You see, the ideal tenant, the perfect tenant, if you may call it that, is a tenant that is hassle-free, pays their bills on time, treats the property as if it were their own, and finally, just as important, barely communicates with you. But what you need to understand is the difference between an ideal tenant and the tenant you actually get can be completely miles off, like miles away. You can get a tenant that will call you up for every little problem that arises. You can get a tenant that will call you up every time and expect you to be a family counselor because they're bickering around with other housemates. You can get a tenant that might literally trash up your property. You get a tenant that might just clutter it up. You can get a tenant that, even worse, doesn't pay their rent. All types of tenants you can get. And even when you do get a good tenant, they eventually, just because of how things are in a property, eventually things will wear down and you'll still have to maintain it over time. As you can see, there are a few things to consider, and even more so cost for, when it comes to managing and maintaining a property. This is why I actually include it during the estimation process. So before I even buy the property, guys, I run the numbers. I include this when I'm running the numbers, because it's better to deal with it from the get-go than to have these issues arise and not prepare for it. And I've actually included this inside the video that I previously mentioned, making money on rental properties. You can find a link down in the description box below. Click on it, give it a watch, guys, if you want to find out more about how I prepare for these hidden costs. But don't be fooled, flipping a property also comes with its negatives as well. You see, when you're flipping a property, typically you're under a sort of time constraint. You want to get your money out within a certain time period to do other stuff with. And so there's a huge pressure and huge dependency on contractors and builders to do what they say they're going to be doing in the time frame that they say they're going to be doing it in. Well, as we know, contractors and builders don't always stick to their words. So effectively, you've got to micromanage each and every job that's being done on that property. And that's easier said than done. Flipping also relies on buying undervalued properties, guys. Now, the problem with this is it's heavily dependent on what market you're in. You see, it can make it harder for you to buy undervalued properties when the property is actually booming. And it can make it harder for you to make a profit when you're selling in a recession period. So there's that to consider as well. But for me, the biggest disadvantage when it comes to flipping a property has to come from the amount of tax you have to pay over here in the UK. I've left links down in the description box below that give the full details on this, so check it out if you need to. In a nutshell, if you look to flip a property personally in your name over here in the UK, then you have to pay 10% to 28% capital gains tax on your profits, which is crazy. And this ranges dependent on what type of taxpayer you are, your taxable allowance, and also whether the property is residential or not. For those property investors that want to flip via a limited company route, The good thing is they don't pay capital gains tax anymore, so that's out of the way, because now they have to pay corporation tax, which is 90% tax. Crazy. But there's great news for home movers that have never rented out a part of their property, that have never used any part of it for business, and also have a total footage less than 5,000 square meters. Those home movers specifically don't have to pay any tax, which is great. But you then have to prove to the government that you didn't just buy that property to flip it. Either way you look at it, each route comes with their pros and cons. But I hope I've showed you guys in this video how to tailor it to your specific scenario, because that's the key part. And don't be afraid to use both strategies in unison with each other. For some people out there, the best strategy actually might be to rent out a property for several years and then flip it later on. That might be one of the best strategies to use, so don't be afraid of that too. But now that you guys know how to answer for your specific scenario, which one's the best to do, flip a property or rent it out, don't just keep this video to yourself, guys. Let the rest of YouTube know about it. And the best way to do that is by smashing that like button, sharing this video, and subscribing with the notification bell on also. It's your favorite YouTuber, guys, DS Learn Finance, Financial Educate you guys to freedom. For the beginners, by a former beginner, every Sunday at 3 p.m. Bye. DS Learning Finance.
Whoa.